Well, thank you all for coming to the session. I believe at this point all of you likely know me, but I'm Natasha Duarte. I'm the director of the Composting Association of Vermont. I am also the chair of the Farm to Plates Food Cycle Community of Practice, and have my hands in all kinds of different. I'm on the advisory council for Cat Buxton's Upper Valley Super Compost Project, which some of you may have heard about earlier this morning or know about. And this session is actually part of CAV's project working with farmers on community-oriented food scrap composting. It's a project funded by USDA Rural Utility Services. We're wrapping up our second year in that grant, but actually it's actually our second grant, so we've been doing this for almost 4 years now. And one of the challenges that we faced is having, there's more farmers who were interested in this than technical service providers to help support them. There are, so in my conversations and working on this project, like I've heard from NRCS folks, I've heard from UVM Extension, from Kat Buxton, who will share her perspective. James, you and I have had some conversation. Like, where are the technical service providers to support this work, to actually help meaningfully, not just sort of the one and done, but actually work on a consistent method from beginning, fledgling, I don't know how to compost, all the way to how do you use the compost. Because what we found is that if you don't know how to compost, and if you're just starting, or maybe you've never done food scrap composting, people don't even know what questions to ask at the beginning. You can't just cover it all in one workshop and be like, and come back a year later and wonder why you don't have all these lovely compost programs set up. And so, so the idea for this session actually started last year. And our current situation is just also very different now. And we talked about, do we reframe it? Do we just do a different session altogether? And my team, who I'll introduce in a minute, all really thought that it was still a really important conversation to have in this moment. And by that, I just generally mean CAV had 2 federal grants out that are now likely suspended. I don't know if those programs will even exist. And both of those, we had sort of been ramping up, and the idea was to bring in technical service providers who might be sort of more junior and mentor them, pair them with one of us who've been doing this work for a number of years. James and I have talked about, establishing a hands-on component for the 131 school, which is virtual education. I also teach the Master Composter program, 2-month community composting and compost use, and we do 3 hands-on, just 2-hour trainings at different community sites. So how do we get more of this, and how do we get more people into this field, and how do we keep them here once they're here, right? Because this is honestly, for most of us, this is like a gig economy, where it's grant to grant. How do we actually entice people not only to do this work, and then stay in this line of work? And it's not just a matter of skill. We do need to support and build people's skills and confidence. I think mentorship and peer-to-peer learning is a really important piece of that. But it's also just there's got to be someone to employ them. How do we do this? And so the idea for this session is really just to, I have some prompts, we have no slides, this is a roundtable discussion. I'm going to introduce some of the technical service providers who've been working with me for the last almost 4 years, who are in the room to share as well. But it's really just brainstorming together, getting your ideas. What are the resources that are there? How can we leverage each other's work to get where we all are trying to go? Because increasingly, I think we're gonna, I've been thinking are there people maybe at the Natural Resource Conservation Districts who are already doing soil health work, and we can maybe give them some training in compost to keep them going, if they're already working with farmers, can we expand the services basically that they're providing, kind of ideas. So I'm the project lead on this USDA project. Athena Lee Bradley, we're going to go around the room and introduce ourselves, but Athena Lee Bradley is one of my technical service providers, former CAF board member. Kat Buxton and I have been co-conspirators on all kinds of things, back and forth, supporting each other's work. But she's been working on this project for 4 years and is a real strong thought partner with me on this. And Allie Baker is also one of the technical service providers, who I think it's fair to say was maybe had a little less experience, but took James's 131, dove in, and we've been pairing, and she's now an old pro. So, and is also working with Kat on the school composting. So I thought we'd start, I'm gonna ask Kat to just share a little bit of the technical service provider challenges that the school project has been facing. And then I thought we'd start by going around the room, and I'd love to hear who you are, sort of where you work, and what brought you to this session, or just like one sentence. So we're gonna get into a lot of conversation, but just so we all know sort of who's in the room. But Kat, I'll let you sort of get us going with that.
Yeah, so we, Super Compost Project is working with 8 schools right now. They're composting all of their food waste, and we give them 2 years of technical expertise once their system is up and running, because, well, for a bunch of reasons. We also give them classroom support, so those are 2 separate things. In our project specifically, that could be the same thing, and we're actually finding that a TSP who can also do classroom support is really where it's at for a school. And that's kind of what I do, so to bring in the connections to soil health and all of that sort of thing. I think there's a range of technical expertise that's needed depending on the project that we're thinking about, but the consistency of being able to check in with the same people over a long period of time as you're troubleshooting, as wildlife come through, or recipe ingredients change, or weather changes, or things get too wet or too dry, how do you fix it, how do you use compost covers, all of these things I think are really important. They're an important sort of missing piece, even down to the home composting scale. So I think, I used to run a little business called the Compost Doctor, where people would call me up and I'd come to their house. And I stopped doing it because I felt like I was just taking people's money for the same thing. Like, I get out of my car and I could smell immediately that they didn't have enough carbon. So I started making YouTube videos and being like, here, just watch this. It's not that I didn't need the money, I do. It's just that I like to earn an honest living and not a dishonest one where I feel like I'm just taking people's money. But the money part is important, I think, in TSP longevity, in having, how do we shift our culture in a way that values waste management? I don't even like to call it that. I'd rather call it nutrient management, but no one except the people in this room know what I'm talking about when I say that. So how do we shift the culture in a way that creates value and recognizes the need for ongoing technical service support for everything from backyard gardeners to small and large scale farmers to condo units to all the places where food generators happen, and localize our nutrient cycling. I'm not sure if that's what you envisioned when I was going to say, but that's where my mind's at.
That's good.
Right now.
Yeah.
And I often use this word of like, we can't be extractive. Like, I think there's a really important place for volunteerism in our world, and that needs to be uplifted. We have not enough volunteers on like all the fire departments and et cetera, all the places. Somehow that's been lost in our society, and I think we need to lift that up. And there's room to volunteer as a composter in our program, but we also have paid technical service providers, and I see them as different. So a volunteer can show up and turn a compost pile and learn, and if they're learning from it and it feels like a mutual exchange, that's great. But I think that valuing the service to be paid work so someone can actually earn a living doing that is really important as well.
And just quickly, I know you've shared that you've had a hard time finding the technical service providers who are available to work with schools. So as you're thinking about bringing more schools online, who are going to fill those roles?
Yeah, well, you know, I think part of the
Except
finding
you and Ally.
that may have been me, not like, I think we have people that can do the work, but it's not enough to be a whole job, right? So we need people that can do gig work like I do. Right now, I think our technical service providers, we are paying them for 10 or 12 hours a month. It's not very much. It's really worthwhile work. We'd like to be able to increase that, and we're grant funded. So I also am thinking about, just like you are, like, we can pay you for this year.
Maybe.
Maybe.
Unless the grants are frozen, right?
Right?
Yeah.
And that can be really helpful for some people in the way that we have our workflow through life as gig workers, or we're creative workers. But in terms of longevity, it would be really nice to have that sort of setting. And I see our conservation districts as being a big player in that work going forward, who also struggle to keep technical service providers for soil health and so many other things, because also grant funding, pay scale, the ability to say you can have this job for 5 years, all of those things. I think there's a lot of overlap. So technical service in composting, but more than that, I'd like to see it extend to, in my case, classroom education for young people. In Farmer's case, how does compost and soil health, how do they relate to one another? In municipalities' cases, here's compost, how do you use that for stormwater management? You know, so all of the ways that we can use compost and really expanding that, the package of technical service that can come.
Yeah, great, thank you. So now we're going to go around the room, and if you guys can just say your name, where you're from, like where you work or what you do, and just something quick about sort of what brought you here, if there's something on your mind. And we'll just go with you.
Hi, I'm Margarita. I'm finishing my undergrad in Boston. I just finished in December, and I'll be moving to Vermont soon for law school. And I've just been working on a nonprofit that connects nonprofits with volunteers and connects businesses with opportunities to donate to compost sites and farms. And it's an app startup. So.
Fabulous. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Tess. I'm from Epic Renewal. We're community composters based in Rhode Island, but we work throughout New England in boots on the ground, and we also work on software for the Community Compost Network to help empower everyone to tell their story more effectively and secure resources to grow, primarily with the intention of getting all of our community composters to a living wage.
Awesome.
I'm Jane Woodhouse. I came because I completed the Master Composter certification, and I just wanted to connect more with the composting community.
Great, thank you.
I'm Lori Farrington. I am from here. I was a science teacher over at East Randolph Academy, just next town over. And I am here because I'm no longer the science teacher, and we're kind of losing that culture in our school of the gardening, the composting, and I want to reestablish that culture in our school. And this is invigorating, getting those ideas going, and I want to bring that back to our school.
Awesome.
I'm Abby Folk, and I live in Tunbridge now, but I lived in Chittenden County recently and started a sort of waste shed management and compost and gardening being a part of that at Charlotte Central School, and did that for maybe 8 or 9 years. And I have been out of it for a while, and since I'm now a neighbor to this conference, and I am wanting to hopefully tap into what Kat and Allison are doing in the Upper Valley, I thought it would be a good reboot to come back to the VORS conference.
Thank you.
We like seeing you. Athena, I live in Brattleboro. I do consulting work with Natasha and have been doing composting work for couple of decades now, and I worked full-time for a municipality writing grants, which let me tell you is becoming more and more depressing. Which is partly why we're here, because our work is going to be harder and harder to get funding for. So, and that's a concern.
Thank you.
I'm Taylor. I work right upstairs in the Center for Agriculture and Food Entrepreneurship. It's we're building an associate's degree right now here on campus around ag, food, and forest. And I'm here just to learn more about workforce development in this field and see what I can bring back to my team and see how I can, I'm excited to hear more and learn more.
Thank you. Tom.
I'm Tom Aiken. I'm the agronomist and technical service provider coordinator for USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service. I attended the Maine compost school many years ago. I've always been interested in composting and am particularly interested in the intersection of the technical service provider needs that you folks have and the TSPs that we have with USDA, and see if there's any commonality we can find.
Great, thank you. Allie.
I'm Allie. I do back-end support for community ecological and agricultural resilience initiatives through a project called Fruit to Root. And I'm also, as you heard, the junior member of the on-farm composting team, which I absolutely love, because even though they're not formally charged with training me, the veteran members of that team are outstanding, and I learned so much from them. And I actually hope that we'll get to talk about the value and the opportunity of doing technical service as part of teams and how we could expand that model, because I have found it really valuable for my own learning and work. That's me.
Thank you. James.
James McSweeney, and so I live outside the Boston area. I'm from Vermont and worked for a nonprofit 15 years ago that was called the Highfield Center for Composting. And we did technical assistance both to like the food scrap generator sector and partnered with a lot of solid waste districts. And this was all just as sort of like there was beginning to be a push in food scrap composting around the state. And then in 2012, the ban came on. And so I am a technical assistance provider at a company called Compost Technical Services. And that was a company that I essentially started when Highfields collapsed in 2013. And I just kept doing the work that I was doing. And I had my mentor was Tom Gilbert, who now runs Black Dirt Farm. And so I was like, that was just the blessing that got me to be a consultant, was like I literally had someone hold my hand for a couple of years and find, we were already out there in the world and people were contacting us saying, how do we do this? How do we do this? And we were kind of going out and just learning it by doing it out in the field with these composters, many of whom are still out there making compost now. So I kind of have that background, and then, but I wouldn't have been able to survive if I was just working in Vermont, and it was only 3 or 4 years ago that I started doing this work full time when I started the 131 school and after my book came out. And so, that's just a little perspective. I've been essentially a gig worker, I have a little office that I built in my garage. I go work at the coffee shop.
I saw you that whole time.
Yeah.
I was there.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
They imploded and you were like, what?
Yeah. I mean, at the time, CAV was seriously considering taking over a lot of that programming, and
It was before me.
it was before you, but yeah, I mean, it's just, so, I mean, I can tell you that there's a need out there, and it's well beyond Vermont. And the thing that's allowed me to keep doing this is that, my work has expanded into, I'm doing tons of work in Massachusetts, New York, Rhode Island. It's grown, it's northeastern based now. But I wouldn't be able to sustain myself if it weren't for that.
Great.
So that's a little bit of information.
Thank you. Cheyenne?
I'm Cheyenne Rico. I'm the outreach coordinator for Vermont NRCS. I'm based in Colchester. I work statewide, formerly a soil conservationist and conservation planner for NRCS. I've been with the agency since 2018. And in my role as outreach coordinator, I work on the partnerships team, so I generally try to strengthen NRCS's relationships with other organizations in Vermont doing conservation work like CAV. And yeah, just interested in this conversation to contribute how I can, but also gleaning a lot of ideas from this whole conference on how we can support composting in Vermont and strengthen our partnerships with the composters in the state.
Great, thank you. So the other thing I forgot to say is that I'm also part-time, so I'm the director of CAB, but that's just a half-time job, and I'm fully employed outside of that otherwise. So, which is how it's my two sort of gig pieces that I put together, right? So I think one of the things we've heard is a lot of sort of like rubbing nickels together to get a dime, right? I mean, that's sort of where we're at, and that's part of the challenges that I think that in CAP's project, I'm a big fan of the teams, like Ali was saying, so we have at least 2 of us assigned to every partner farm. One, so we can be more responsive to our farmers if they need, like if I'm out of town, Ali or Kat or Athena can pick up the slack back and forth. But also, one of the things that we talk about, especially around community composting, is the importance of redundancy in systems for composting, but also on the human side, right? The communication, the outreach to your community, all of those things. And so working in a team with a team approach lets us role model that for the people that we're trying to get to do that too. And that's a really important piece for us. I also just want to quickly acknowledge that there were 3 Eco-AmeriCorps volunteers who are going to be here today who are no longer AmeriCorps volunteers. And so this just sort of underscores sort of the, and I guess this is 2 days old maybe, but I just found out yesterday because I've been a little consumed with the planning the summit. So, but I can just say in my 8 years with CAV, you know, I've seen Eco-AmeriCorps volunteers engaged with the solid waste management districts. One is now a district manager. The other is an outreach coordinator, right? This is like the new group of people coming into the workforce who are getting this hands-on experience. And so that's just I'm not sharing that for it to be a downer, but this is a really important and timely conversation that we're having right now because things are going in a lot of different directions. And I do think that there is a lot of opportunity. I always try to see opportunity in challenging situations. But I think the whole livability piece is really putting a stress, you know, like being able to earn a living wage and put things together is just an added stress when we're all experiencing so much stress from so many different parts of our lives. It's harder for people to have the capacity to really figure out doing 10 things at once to pay their bills, much less get ahead in anything. So I just wanted to start with that. We have a great group in the room. In preparing for this session, I sort of thought of 5 different things. I'm sure there are ones missing, but I'm just going to share with you what was on my mind. And then if there are any that you guys are sort of, you know, think is more timely or you want to dig into, we can just sort of go from there. So the first is entry and training pathways. So like how do people get engaged in this work? Like is it through Eco-AmeriCorps? Is it through, you know, Master Composter or some of these other opportunities? Retention and support. So there's actually a fair number of us who have been doing this work in this room for years, and we've somehow kept at it in spite of it being challenging. So like what are those characteristics and what are those qualities, and how do we communicate our stories in a way that actually sound like enticing, that people would want to engage and stay engaged? Jobs and funding in this moment, I think, is a big thing. Really happy to have the two of you from NRCS here to just provide that perspective and maybe some insight into the connections with your TSPs or how we can collaborate with the support that you guys bring, a little bit more stability from that point of view. I mean, you guys are still here anyway, so we'll see how far that goes. But I do think that jobs and funding in this moment is particularly challenging. And then equity access in the future workforce. So sort of before, in the early stages of planning this session, I was thinking a lot of like, who's missing from this workforce and why? What strategies can we do to get people engaged and interested in this, and how, like, are we doing? I'm always looking around and thinking, like, who's not at the table?
Billionaires. Billionaires.
Billionaires. Okay. If anyone knows anyone who wants to get engaged, give them my number or me theirs. But like, how can, like, who isn't necessarily here? And there's a lot of reasons. I did reach out and have conversations with a number of NRCD folks, but this is a really challenging time of year. A lot of them have like tree planting things and other stuff. So some of it is just a timing thing. And I'm often in conversation with our solid waste management district outreach and education coordinators. And like, I'm always just trying to think, like, who else is doing this and how can we collaborate and really leverage our work? Because it's such a challenging workforce category, I guess. And then also thinking about what a thriving compost technical workforce might look like in 5 to 10 years, and writing my 2 outstanding grant proposals. I spent a lot of time thinking about that. And James, I wonder from your morning session about sort of the resiliency in this sector, might have some thoughts to bring in, weave in from your morning session. And then always collaboration and shared resources. So what is, like, Taylor and I have just been put in touch, and I didn't even know that this program was starting. And so we've been having a lot of conversations about, like, okay, they're gonna have students in 2026. How can we, have a, like what would a compost technical service provider certificate program or course or training or ride-alongs or mentorship look like? Like, where can we, I feel like I'm always meeting people who are engaged in this kind of work, even in little old Vermont, and somehow we're still not making, like, I don't know, like, I'm just meeting them. Like, it seems like such a small community in one respect, and then also we're so disparate that we don't know. So I'm always looking for ideas of collaboration, and then sharing resources. And what, Kat and I with the school composting program and the online toolkit that we developed for, all of us co-developed on the project for working with farmers is up. And how can we just keep building on that and sharing out whatever we can so we're spending time filling gaps as opposed to recreating what might already exist. I think about that. I know Kat, you and I have talked about like curriculum for schools. Like, a lot of that exists, but there are some really key gaps that need to be filled, and isn't it great to like spend energy there as opposed to like blank page?
Yeah.
So I sort of have prompting questions that we could go through, but I'm also just wondering, like, are any of those sort of general buckets or themes sparking an idea or conversation that one of you wants to bring forward?
I can just share something.
Yeah.
This actually came out of James's session, and just hearing about a lot of the challenges in the schools related to composting. Just want to put it out there that it's within the scope of outreach and the outreach policy of NRCS to provide conservation education in schools. And I've gone to schools before to talk about soil health, to go into school gardens and just get our hands dirty and talk about the soil. And there have been other instances where NRCS has helped with curriculum development, and I just think that I would be interested and love to collaborate more with some of the school initiatives related to composting. I was chatting with the person I was sitting next to with Green Mountain Compost and the Chittenden County Solid Waste about some of their school outreach efforts, and I think that's something NRCS could assist with to an extent.
Great. Yeah, Abby.
Well, at one point in my life, I was a librarian. And so what comes to mind is just, I mean, I know this is on everyone else's mind, but like a reference interview. And hearing Michael, I forget his last name, talking this morning, like literally having a map of like, okay, this is the city, these are our neighborhoods, and just really making an index of everything that's happening that you think could possibly interrelate. And I don't know to what extent that's already been done. You know, with the content of, and I know it's interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary, but really focusing on composting instead of nutrient recapture. So just because that overview and indexing or listing just seems so crucial to a lot of the subtopics that you brought up, and you know where to go. So it's a question I ask. I don't know to what extent it's been mapped for the whole state of Vermont.
Yeah, that's one thing that I think is really interesting. And James, I don't know if, sorry, these are my like scrolling notes, that some of it shorthanded. CC is community composting for me in my world. But I know there's like ILSR, the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, who some of you may know has this community composting coalition. Thank you. There are very few Vermonters who are part of that, but it's, and that's something I could probably do a better job of trying to get people into, but like, do we, like this, one of the things that I think about is like this, there's need for local connection and this local indexing and mapping, but also regional or like within this larger context. And I really see a need for that at both scales. James, I don't know if you know of like community, like composting related.
When you say indexing, do you mean like mapping of composters? Like
Just
that sort of
mapping
thing?
of all of the, like, what part, your work touches on this, you know, food systems, your work touches on it.
So I think of it sort of like an asset mapping exercise, maybe?
Yeah.
We've done a little bit of that, but it's very hard to get into. And I know the Vermont Garden Network used to keep some of that for gardens, that community gardens that composted. But that's a good, I mean, I think that there's a real need for that.
You looked at the Close the Loop strategic plan.
Yeah.
You know, I think we tried to do some of that like 12 years ago.
Yeah.
And a lot of it probably still applies. Of course, we're 12 years later, and a lot has actually happened. But it's, I mean, just like those partners that you just might not think of, right? Like, somebody probably has thought of them. It just takes a lot of work to start to do that, and then, I mean, it takes time. And,
or even folks, I mean, I'm a member of I teach part of the Master Composter, UVM's Master Composter program, and there's a listserv, but like I have a hard time getting just a list of who the master composters are. I can post to the list in general, but I can't do like targeted direct outreach unless they've come through in the years that I've done it. Or I could just say like, but I could maybe do a specific outreach and be like, hey, we're trying to sort of pinpoint people in different areas to the geographic spread or something like that. That's one thing that comes to mind.
I guess I'm just getting at like the creative sort of sparking points where people can collaborate to support towards specific goals. That would be the idea behind that work.
Yeah, we do a little bit of that around our schools, but I just made some notes to really think more about, I have this concentric circles of communities of practice, but I think we could be more detailed about really thinking of that more as asset maps of people, places, sites, skills, so everything from educational to know-how, and people willing to roll up their sleeves. Like all of that kind of stuff for each school community, I think could be really helpful for our project. And then in my brain, I'm also now connecting each of those school communities to each other, right? Yeah. So really building out what I like to call that social mycelium, that sort of network that really literally supports us all.
Yeah. I think a barrier is, I don't know how much this is a barrier, but I've seen it be a barrier in other places, is like this sense of scarcity, and like nonprofits are competing with each other for the same resources, and and so potential part, like the fact that Vermont has a compost association and a group to actually come and speak for composters, advocate for composters, for and food policy, group, like a food, like there's all these amazing partners, and I think Vermont does a really good job of actually like doing that collaboration, but I do feel like a barrier is the idea that there is a lot of competition, that there's potential competition, and that really like that those partners are ultimately gonna make more, like expand the pie versus competing for the same piece of pie, right? Like that's just an idea that I think is really challenging. It's been challenging for me at times to get past. And I'm like, no, this is real. Like actually, if we collaborate, it works.
It's more work for
stronger
for everybody
together.
Yeah. I did write down the challenge of scarcity mentality, because I do think that's real, but I think because I'm part-time, I know so many other people who are engaged part-time, I'm like, anyone who is willing to play in the sandbox with me, please. I can't do it all, is kind of how I feel on any given day, right? Like just,
I'll just give it all away.
My human capacity is limited, and that's something that we talk about a lot as well. And I think especially in this moment, it's really important to think about that from a human capacity level, because what I've found with people I connect with is just with all of the stress in the world, so just bigger pieces now, I feel like, on good days, a lot of people I connect with are like at 75 or 80%, just because they're stressed, distracted, other things happening in their lives, whatever it is. And so I just feel like, I feel almost like it's the human capacity that's scarce. So I'm just like, how do we grow it, right? It's not like in terms of scarcity in terms of resources, but I feel like it's becoming more scarce to find people who can engage. Yeah, Tess.
I think just like a number of the topics that just came up kind of make me want to circle back to the Community Composter Coalition as just a place that has impacted me a lot in my career. So like my organization, we began in Los Angeles, literally less than a mile from Michael Martinez's core site. And he welcomed us and advised us and warned us about the time the cops came to him and XYZ. And like that was hugely formative for how we behaved together, how we worked in parallel, didn't compete, carved out different spaces. And then by the time we left LA, there were 5 other organizations that he was welcoming the same way. And that's, I think, a huge piece of like leadership in the climate space and the volunteer space and the social impact space. I spend a lot of time outside of my compost life working with social entrepreneurs, and I maintain across the board like the most important thing when you're doing socially impactful work, especially when you care about the mission more than yourself, is having a community of support that challenges you to value yourself and your labor that way, but also that has shared in the same lived experience. And so, like for me, when we joined the Community Compost Coalition, it was the first time I felt like I met 100 other us's, or people who had been through the same moment. And like James is on there sharing technical expertise and answering questions. And what's really interesting to me about that space, and what kind of stunned me about that space, was how insanely collaborative it is, despite the fact that probably 470 out of 500 could say they're competing with one another. But folks will gladly share like best practice resources. They'll share their pricing sheets. Someone will be like, I'm composting for a wedding and I've never done this before, what do I do? And 20 people will share tips and guides. someone will be like, I need to buy a truck, what do I do? And it's like the hottest topic for 6 months. And there's something about both like the live community of support that happens there that's really big about keeping going from a morale standpoint or knowing that others have been through the same hurdles as you. But also it's become over time, like ILSR has made a point of being a leader in best practice documentation. So they kind of gather case studies throughout the country in the same way that James's book gathers case studies throughout the country. And so they sort of, we can look at them as like this umbrella best practice guide. We use their resources when we're advocating for policy. And I know like for myself with my own food policy council, I use their data constantly when I'm making an argument. And if we didn't have this national level census and we didn't have other examples, I wouldn't be able to argue with my state why this matters. If I didn't have like California doing state level funding and proving we can do this stuff for 1/3 of the cost of industrial, my state wouldn't care about talking to all of us about it. And I will say one of the things that's really interesting right now, kind of like in this moment and in response, is there's an enormous amount of energy behind 2 working groups that have started. And one is specifically on both capturing and activating data for advocacy, growth, best practice information, and the other is aggregating a resource library so that when there is a best-in-class resource for what you bring to teach a classroom about worms, there's 20 documents there and everyone shares the best ones and there's collective permission to use it. So there's something I think both at like the local and the national, it's at whatever level it is, building these spaces that can become like both a community of support and a library of resource, I think is like critically valuable right now, especially when things are thinning out and folks are dropping out of their roles because they can't stay in them. There's kind of that mycelial thread at both the here level and the bigger level that I think we need to nurture interpersonally and at a higher level in order to keep us all fueled and going.
Yeah, it gives perspective.
Yeah. And like almost everybody is going through the same barriers. It's really eye-opening and it's kind of empowering in a sense when you feel like it's you or your state. It's quite literally everybody, and it's more powerful to look at it with a room of people or, you know, a huge 500 people. But it makes a difference in how you think about it perspective-wise and how you approach it.
Yeah. One of the things, this is maybe a little tangent, but I'll just say this. When I've talked to some of the farmers or other community composters in Vermont who I work with, their hesitance to ILSR's group is that a lot of them are, it's like their business and it's often hauler composters together. And it's not, so it's a different model and they feel, like I think James, even in your book, I think we probably fall, a lot of folks in Vermont fall into micro composting, not even like community, I mean like, right? So we're talking like neighborhoods sometimes with 5 houses composting together. And so I think that, I totally hear what everyone is saying about ILSR, and I'm actually a member of that group too and benefit from it. But I think also thinking about the map or the concentric circles at different scales is really important because it can, that group can feel really overwhelming if you're doing this work, but you're not interested in trucks.
Yeah.
Right? So it's this like push and pull in that from a lot of the people that I work with and that community, I guess, is one way to say it.
I think they'd find that there's everybody there. There's literally everybody there. All scales, all
Maybe if they join,
all scales under a certain scale.
Would have,
I guess one of the things that, like, in the challenge being like, how do you actually employ somebody, you know, or how do you employ multiple people? I think ILS the model of how they're encompassing so many people doing so many different types of work. And I think back to how Highfield's operated too, like, yeah, we work with composters, but like our main gig was working with food scrap generators. Like that was the thing that was really driving the whole organization and our ability to bring in funding. And so like, I honestly think like there isn't, maybe there's more work than I realize in working with composters, but I think like that unless you kind of pull in other roles and people kind of wear multiple hats and can move around between stuff, it's hard to create full-time positions and multiple, especially in a small state like Vermont. I mean, you can move outside of Vermont, but like there's huge needs in things like business planning. Mm-hmm. There's huge needs in things like sourcing, grant writing and like accessing funds. Mm-hmm. So like business development type work, potentially being contractors for solid waste districts. That was one of Highfield's biggest things that we did. Yeah. And like all those roles, like it ends up being a challenge to juggle all of that. It ends up being multiple people, but it worked. Like it worked back in Highfield's day, and I think it still holds up, maybe more so than ever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, talk.
Yeah, no, that's all really helpful.
Super helpful. Yeah, I mean, CAB does that in a lot of ways because we all bring our different skills and all of that. Mm-hmm. But we still need money to do these things, and that's the problem is we don't have money.
Mm-hmm. So there's the funding, back to the funding aspect of it and
however you get it.
Yeah, how to do that. Is it grant, what outside of grants is there? Like what other funding mechanisms are there? There's fee for service, right? There's charging people for,
I guess I also wonder what outside of nonprofit there could be, if there are models in other industries folks know about that might aggregate low-wage or gig workers in a way that would return more of the available resources to their pockets. That's not a problem that's unique to our field. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious if folks have experimented with other sort of legal, organizational, or tax models that might make that possible in a different way. Like I've had people suggest a couple to me, but I don't know if anybody in the room.
Like worker-owned, cooperative or worker-owned businesses kind of structures, like.
I guess that could be an example of one, sure, Athena. But particularly if you've seen it applied to good effect in another area in a way that you think you would bring to this problem.
Well, it's an idea. I mean, the bakery, the flour company, King, whatever, Arthur Farmer, flour.
I'm not sure what this website is called, but I know a few engineers at MIT that are working for like bigger companies, but they want to donate their time throughout the year to work on nonprofit projects and software for nonprofits. And so I'm sure if you look it up and search for it, you can find it, but there's this website they told me about that, what is it?
Cashify?
It might be
That's
that.
one of them.
Yeah, but there are websites where people who work for like these bigger companies still want to feel like they're contributing to a more impactful mission, and they do that through websites like that, and nonprofits can sign up and be matched with potential software developers and people in other lines of work.
Yeah.
The center, have you looked at how the Center for Eco Technologies composting
CET?
programs are funded?
Yeah.
Because there's a mechanism that's paid for through like the energy department or energy.
There is. So I actually just maybe 6 weeks ago had a conversation with them about how they're funded, and part of it though is not even part of how they fund their composting work is through a tax on, I don't know this in front of me, but whatever it is, but it's unrelated, it's energy related, and it's not related to compost. And so one of the things that Lorenzo was saying was he saw as probably a really big challenge for CAB or for compost focus is that's our focus. Like they're all kinds of things, so they can make money over here or have state or municipal taxes over here pay for a program over here. So he was like, yeah, if we were just the organics part, we wouldn't exist. Mm-hmm. Unless it was through grants, because they do get some grants for that. Mm-hmm. But most of what they do is by playing in a much bigger sandbox than the Composting Association of Vermont does.
Yeah, they get a lot of state funding though.
Yeah.
A lot.
They do get,
Well,
well,
it is, but
yes,
it's a
but the
separate
state funding,
pool.
there's a different, there's like there's a state piece of, like a percentage that goes to them from the state that there doesn't seem to be.
Vermont probably already also has the same pool because it's like a regional northeastern thing. I was trying to pull it up, but the internet's not working. But you're right, it's the energy.
It's for the energy, but they got a contract to do their composting work from the state.
Right,
Because NERC wanted that contract, and they got it.
Yeah,
So,
But it's kind of like the Department of Energy and Power, which is what's interesting and strange.
yeah.
It is, yeah. And they do, I mean, so with our on-farm composting work, we work with farmers in New Hampshire, Vermont, and now the North Country in New York, in part because it's easier to get federal grants if you work in multiple states. It's just part of it, but also, I mean, New Hampshire is really interesting. I'm actually going to be at their Food Network conference later this month, or in May. But there are very few people doing this work there. Like CET comes in, we go over, there's like who, now that they have the diversion laws in place, I work closely with New Hampshire DES folks. They're trying to fill some gaps, but they're like, yeah, I mean, there's like one planning commission that does some of this work, but that's sort of it. So there's definitely just a lack of people. Any other? But yeah.
Very quickly, one
No, please.
policy that we straight up stole the language from ILSR for is a waste tipping surcharge fee. And it doesn't create a big pool. I think our calculations was it would be like $2 million a year. But we very specifically drafted that legislation, and it's in its second year of being heard. But the idea behind it was to kickstart infrastructure development by earmarking half of it for municipalities and half of it for technical service providers. The goal being that our Food Policy Council or CET would steward the right matchmaking and pair a municipality ready to go with a small funding platform and the right person to jumpstart, in the hope that if we pilot, the community buy-in will follow. So it's definitely not the same as paying somebody's salary, but it is something like creative we're trying to do to see if we can create a small starting soil fund of our own.
Tess, I'm sorry, can you say who we is again?
Oh, that's the state of Rhode Island. That's like our Rhode Island Food Policy Council together.
Is that where you are in Rhode Island?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
And the original version was written in Maryland, and the language is like straight up public, and they saved a third for on-farm composting on that program. So there's a couple different versions, but if y'all ever play with
Did
that,
they pass it there?
in Maryland, I don't know. I know that we've had positive reception, but I don't think we're gonna get passed this year. But it would quite literally, it would cost each household $2 a year. and it
Does
would
Rhode
create a
Island
small
have a
fund.
ban? Do they have an organics ban?
Yes, we don't have any money or staff to enforce it. So we have, our ban is commercial and schools. And it's pretty loose. We had to put in pretty aggressive language to tighten it up in terms of radius and service providers. The infrastructure can't match the requirement.
So are commercial operations like restaurants or food processors, are they paying a tipping fee to dispose of their organics?
Some are, but again, even if you're falling in the waste threshold where you should be doing it, there's no one enforcing it. So there's less commercial happening, the schools are happening. And that's because we have a few really, really kick-ass youth leaders who are really angry. And we have a couple nonprofits that really excel at pulling people together and building school programming.
And are local farms, like close to those generators, are any of them taking waste and composting?
We don't have many farms that do that. Our farmland is really precious and really expensive. So it's mostly compost processors taking it to their sites, or it's happening on site at the school.
Any thoughts from NRCS TSPs and sort of overlapping efforts?
Most of our TSPs are soil health related. we have some big categories. We have engineering, we have soil health and agronomy, we have forestry, we have energy. So composting is kind of out in the middle, kind of like between agronomy and engineering. To be a TSP, to design composting facilities, you need a PE. But you don't need a PE to do soil health plans, which could include compost. You don't even need a degree in agronomy to do soil health plans. You just need to know the basics of soil health. And there are opportunities to assist farmers to start composting. That's one of the, part of the problem with our TSP program, it's like the chicken and egg, is that we don't market the TSP program to farmers because there are no TSPs out there to do the work. And TSPs don't become TSPs because there are no farmers asking for their work. So it's like the communication isn't the greatest.
And you just recently, there were some practices turned on for composting, is that right?
They've always been turned on. So like all the soil health practices and the composting facilities.
The new one's the soil carbon amendment.
Yeah, soil carbon amendment is the most recent one. That's the one that just started in the last year or two, which includes, could be compost, could be biochar, could be wood chips. So.
Yeah. Two things. After having this conversation with you, we thought that it would be of interest to folks to potentially do some kind of webinar on the NRCS TSP program, which we don't have scheduled. The TSP registry is down, so they aren't even able to make new accounts for new technical service providers. I did create this sign-up form if anyone's interested in being notified when we have the webinar. So I can just pass this around, but we thought it could be of interest to do to have an informational session about the NRCS TSP program and what opportunities exist. So.
Yeah, and in addition to signing up, if you can let me know as well, I can also do an email blast out and put it on our website and social media.
The other thing I just wanted to mention, I don't know how familiar everyone in this room is with NRCS and the financial assistance we provide to farmers, but in Vermont, the funding and the structure of how we fund projects is shifting to a locally led process. So the NRCDs are now developing proposals for what they want to see funded in their counties. And so in fiscal year 26, half of our funding will go to these locally led projects that the districts are putting forward based on local work group feedback. And the goal is that within the next 5 years, 80% of NRCS funding will go to these local proposals. And why that's relevant is if the conservation districts aren't including practices like soil carbon amendment or composting facilities, it's very unlikely that those projects would get funded. There's going to be less funding for those types of projects in the future if they're not being asked for by the districts as a result of the community requesting those types of projects. So I encourage everyone to get involved with their local conservation district and to find out about local work group meetings happening in their counties and just generally developing relationships with their local NRCD.
Yeah, I think that's really important. That's something that I mean, I would say I have working relationships with probably 4 NRCDs in Vermont, which is not enough. It'd be great if I should probably go through the group of all the NRCDs as well, but I know, yeah. But I know while there's been, just from my conversations with the folks that I do communicate somewhat frequently with, like there's this focus again on soil health, but there's not like the organic management and composting piece isn't necessarily there talked about. And I also wonder, in one of the grants that one of the applications was to actually work with the NRCDs to create composting modules to complement the soil health work they're already doing, to trying to again connect those dots of better nutrient management, locally. So like from food residuals, and how creating quality compost and keeping those nutrients local also supports and builds healthy soil, right? So like I feel often in conversations that I've had, there's like, it's all about healthy soil, but no one's talking about compost or compost's role in that. And so like I feel like that's sort of a disconnect almost.
Yeah, it's like a chicken and an egg thing, because we're all about building soil health, and that's why we did that grant, to work more with NRCS and getting the word out and working together.
Yeah.
So we need to join the keynotes.
Yeah. Well, and I will say that NRCS folks in Vermont have been on our supervisory committee, steering committee for the project from the inception, really. And somehow, like, all of these dots aren't being connected. And so that's just a gap that I think still is there, and something that CAP could certainly do a better job of, but I also wonder if we could, making these connections and having you guys.
We need a couple farmers willing to be guinea pigs, willing to start composting. Because I think
we have them.
So we've been working with 6 farmers in Vermont and more in New Hampshire who are taking community food scraps.
But are we working with NRCS to try and get financial assistance to help defray some of those costs?
In some cases, they're being set up with NRCS to offset some of those.
Yeah.
Like, are they all applying for EQIP?
A couple have, yeah.
Some are.
Yeah.
I think part of this gets back to, and you guys are probably well aware of this, that most people, even a lot of farmers, don't know the difference between NRCS and NRCDs.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so they think they're working with NRCS when they sign up with their local conservation district, or opposite. So I think, one of my hats is I am the founder director of the Vermont Healthy Soils Coalition, and one of the things I'm constantly saying is like, sign up for your local working group, get involved with your local conservation district, and really trying to.
Here's the contact. Here's what they can do for you.
And here's the soil health principles, and really. But I think it's.
But that's not applying for EQIP through NRCS.
Right, but and acronyms. I think people get lost in acronym soup. And they don't really know that EQIP is the Environmental Quality Assistance, right? So I think that's part of it, and like all this, like the lingo, the practice, what's turned on, what's not. It's like it's taken me years to even just barely understand that lingo. So I wonder if just in terms of this conversation, deepening those connections, and I'm so glad you guys are both here. Like, that's super awesome. And I'm sorry this conservation district couldn't be here too. I know White River is actually moving their headquarters here to Randolph to VSU. They may be doing that today, which is why they couldn't.
Yeah, there were scheduled conflicts.
But I think the more that we can tighten that web, and including with our farmers, and really just, I think that over time we can try and make a difference there together.
Definitely a couple of farms I know one who definitely received EQIP funding for their composting operations.
Is that Sunrise?
Kingdom View did.
Oh, Kingdom View did, yeah.
Cedar Mountain Farm received.
So
I know of another one who was, and then was like a couple points off from the funding mark, and I think they were just going to re-up it, and then he may have gotten funded last year. I've been meaning to reach out to him. So.
The other
Is there
thing,
technical assistance for applying?
Well, that's what the conservation
That is great.
districts do.
Yeah.
Yeah, most of them do. A lot of, yeah.
The thing I just want to add about the EQIP grants, though, is there is also the sense from many of the farmers that I work with that it's bigger scale, more than what they want to do. Whereas we're often saying, especially because most of the farmers we work with don't know how to compost. I mean, they have like a rock pile. They're not active composters.
Yeah.
I'll get to you in just a second. So we want them to start small, especially when they're taking food scraps and integrating those. You know, from there, they often will start with like their CSA members, just doing that, getting the systems honed, getting their recipe right, getting their confidence up, and then expanding. And so some of it is a timing thing. But there's also the match required with EQIP, which is a challenge. And then this is New Hampshire, but one of our farmers actually turned down an EQIP grant because it turned out that what he was being pushed to was 3 times the size of what he wanted on his farm. And they couldn't come to an agreement. And so, and I will be honest, I encouraged him to say no.
Yeah.
He was just learning. I'm like, you do not want like, get your feet wet. You can reapply. Like, don't feel bullied, is how his word, into building something that was at a scale that he would then have to really scramble to fill. And the 2 farmers that we're working with in New York, one did get an EQIP grant for that, and they are underwater. And they've gotten into hauling, which was never their plan. They're now being pushed to take compostables, but they're certified organic, so they can. They are in all kinds of mess. And so there's this real, and we didn't start working with them until they had already built this.
The scale.
But the scale piece is really critical. And I know NRCS has plans for like the 3 bin smaller, but many of our farmers start with like pile bin, maybe pile tumbler. It's small when they start. One of our farms has now expanded and they're taking food scraps from over 100 households. It can, sort of like in Michael's keynote, it can expand into something that is substantial and is meaningful for their community. But pushing, especially farmers who are already doing so many other things, into taking on a much bigger bite than they can, that comes with a financial price tag, is just so you guys know, that's the biggest pushback I receive when I bring up your programs. And I'm like, well, we'll just put a pin in it, and if you get to that point in 5 years, and then this is also why that long-term relationship with farmers is so important and not the one and done. So otherwise they'll never get there, right?
Right.
That's why it's so important when farmers start working with NRCS, is that they really do start small and do things that they really prioritize. Like,
Exactly.
Like the soil health stuff is the easiest stuff to work on, because you can start by just cover cropping. You can then move to like reducing tillage. Then you can start thinking about soil carbon amendments. And then you can start thinking about, hey, how about I make my own soil carbon amendment via composting? But, you know, it's like to throw somebody into the deep end, you know, with 7 practices. We encourage people to do more than 1 practice so that they get funded, but you don't need to do 6 or 7 big scale, because then you're just going to lose them.
I mean, there could be an effort to get farmers into a program and have them buy compost from the many composters, and that increases the market because there is a cost share there for buying compost, and that could segue into on-farm.
Some of this, I think, is due to the lack of experience of some of our younger staff members, because we really have had, up until last month, we had a lot of young people that were in like year 2 and 3 of their careers, and they kind of were learning. But I really think the most important part is for farmers to develop that relationship with their local field offices, their local NRCS people, and their local district people, because they both have something to offer. And oftentimes they don't talk to each other every day. But if farmers get a plan, you know, it's like we stress, you know, it's like get a plan, and it can change, but just start with a plan.
I was just gonna ask if you know if the majority of EQIP funding goes into managing the compost on site or actually transporting the food scraps to the farms?
Neither.
Well, currently, most of the soil carbon amendment practices that are happening here in Vermont are, there are compost or biochar that's being bought from other operations and then brought onto the farm. So there's not a ton of on-farm composting going on right now. I think there's a huge opportunity to do it, but
Farmers are busy.
farmers are busy, yeah.
Is there a way that we can do some cross-training within our CS staff? And we provide compost training for your staff, especially your newer staff? And you provide training so that we know more about what you guys do, so that when we're working with our farmers, we can...
Yeah, I mean,
so to speak.
I think there would be a interest in our staff to.
Great suggestion.
Yeah.
I mean, like I said, I
Because that
attended.
doesn't cost money, because we can do the training. and
Yeah, I mean, 20 years ago, I attended Maine Compost School as a younger
Yeah.
employee.
Yeah.
And a lot of NRCS employees went through that program, so I
Well,
think,
let's
I think
start
that
with
would,
something like that.
that would be,
Yeah.
Love that idea.
Yeah,
And
great
NRCD staff too, you know, finding those. That way, I'm noticing that you had your hand up. What's your name? I forget.
Cheyenne.
Cheyenne. Yeah.
I just wanted to say that within the last couple years, NRCS has adopted a handful of small-scale scenarios, and there are, as you mentioned, there is now a payment scenario for a small-scale compost system, whether it's 3-bin or there's some kind of like peri-urban tumbler scenario as well. So I just wanted to mention that. And a lot of the districts, because I am coordinating the locally led efforts that are happening and reviewed all the districts' proposals, and a lot of them have a focus on wanting to help small farmers. I don't think any of them included compost facility. So that's just...
Yeah, I looked at your website because when we were writing that grant team, you have some great materials on there, so it'd be neat for all of us to learn what you guys do, and then you guys learn from what we do, because we have a great toolkit. So at least the resources would be free then to share with farmers and help us all.
I'm consulting right now with a conservation district and sort of building internal capacity
In Vermont?
in Rhode Island. And it's been interesting in Rhode Island, as you pointed out, there isn't a lot of farmland, and there so far hasn't been a ton of interest from farmers.
What's the most expensive farmland in the country?
Yeah, and there's a lot of other barriers in Rhode Island that we don't have here.
You're working with Molly? You're working with Molly?
With the Eastern Rhode Island Conservation, Sarah Sugar. But one of the things that I don't know if this is true here or not, that I quickly realized is that, like, even though they actually have NRCS staff sort of within their department, they're really separate. Like the conservation district and are they soil conservationists?
with NRCS.
With NRCS. So they can't necessarily talk to each other about specific projects that one side is doing. And so I don't quite understand how that works, but.
Every county is different.
Right.
That's the other thing. Is some NRCS and conservation districts don't want anything to do with each other, and then some districts and their local offices work really closely together. So
It's a lot of nuance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will say something I've observed in Rhode Island is even if folks don't want to be like a formal compost site, like I'm thinking of, I don't know if you've seen Pat's Pasture, but it's like our one poultry farm, and he's regenerative. He follows regenerative practices. He's super thoughtful. He educates on the farm. They don't have time to compost, but they have space. So they dump all the fallen apples from their farm and 3 properties nearby. And I just see an opportunity where it could just be a land share project. It doesn't necessarily need to be the farmer finding extra capacity. It could be, here is a 1/4 acre on my land, I get the compost, you do the processing. I don't know what that looks like, but those partnerships can be more fluid,
Yeah.
potentially.
I know of one situation in Vermont where that's happening, where a composter was leased from land. I don't know if it's that exact exchange,
Yeah.
but they're leasing land. So we have about 10 minutes left. I've really appreciated this sort of ranging conversation, and I was hoping maybe we could just go around the room one more time and share like one closing thought or key takeaway or something that kind of stuck out to you. And also, if there was something that we didn't get to that you think is really important, I'd love to capture that as well. Because this is, ultimately gonna, for CAV is gonna turn into sort of like a summary that I'll be sharing out, but then also, I'm always looking for gaps that our association can work to address and fill and what that looks like. So this time, Jane, why don't we go from the front and around to the back? So Jane.
Okay. But throw something totally out of left field. I don't know if this will come up in the future. But, if you're thinking about jobs in the future, you've got to be thinking about AI. And I had a how that's going to fit into, how that's going to impact. Like, I had a client who pulled up a whole composting plan that ChatGPT had created for them in 2 minutes, with all the details. And I didn't look through it, but I think it probably was not what I would have created, but anyhow,
It hit the mark.
Well, I don't know. But I guess what I'm saying is, I think of these jobs as hopefully being fairly immune from AI.
Where do the feedstocks come from?
Well, this was for like a horse farm that had a bunch of horse manure. Anyhow, it was like,
It's gotta find the feedstocks.
So I think it's interesting, though, to think about what pieces of this could AI potentially play a role in, because I think it's really clear what it can't do is that relationship building.
you're right. Yeah.
Right? And so can it free up some human capacity of us working in this field, so we can really focus on the things that we're good at and passionate about, and maybe writing reports or, I use AI all the time for you have 500 character limit with spaces, and I'll put my draft in and AI does the first edit, and then I look.
You are kidding.
It is.
I have never done that. And I struggle with that.
We all know the time. If you've ever done one of those forms, it takes to be
Okay.
I'm at 5:03.
I am
so
there.
impressed. Anyway, okay, Cheyenne. Parting comment, thought, request, hope, challenge?
I don't know, a lot of things. I mean, you and I were in discussion about, and with our state engineer, potentially trying to do an on-farm workshop showcasing an NRCS compost facility and getting the farmer's perspective of how they're managing it and all of that. So hopefully that will be in the works. I really like the idea of doing more cross-training with CAB and anyone else. Again, I'm happy to contribute to some of the school education pieces for composting, and also if you're interested in staying in the loop about with your local NRCS office, I recommend making an account on farmers.gov, and you can sign up for your whole state or choose specific counties. You can select specific topics that you want to stay up to date about, and that's kind of how the local NRCS offices get, and not just NRCS, but other USDA agencies get news. So.
Great, thank you. Abby?
Well, a lot of this is beyond my experience, but I'll just, I guess, as someone who's only interested in volunteering, that you could have, citizen researchers. I mean, I've done that for you once, occasionally, Natasha.
Yeah, you have.
And that can be helpful to advance, making connections or whatever.
Yeah.
And asset mapping and all that stuff.
Yeah. community researchers could be part of that asset map, people interested in that.
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Good idea, yeah.
Athena?
I like cross-training, and I'm also wondering where the funding's gonna come. We need funding now because we're gonna have huge gaps. So, not to be negative, but just saying as a grant writer.
Okay.
I really like the idea of the asset map. I think like for myself as someone who's really visual and really loves collaboration, I think that that's a nice way to like really see that interactively. I also want to say that we don't have students currently. We're building up this associate's degree program, but hopefully in 2026, if all goes to plan, we'll have our first cohort. And then in 2027, they start an internship program. Each student will do, they'll choose an intern or like an internship opportunity. And part of that is a capstone project at the end. It's like their deliverable piece. So I'm just kind of like bubbling with ideas of how these like young, excited minds could help contribute in some of this, you know, like work with collecting information for an asset map or something else. Like they're probably excited to get their hands dirty too. So I'd love to keep that open in conversation if folks are interested in interns.
Is the associate's degree in composting or?
No, it's in ag, food, and forest systems broadly, so students will go in and be able to narrow down their interests. Yeah, that'd be cool though.
That would be awesome. Tom?
I think the asset map would be super helpful for feedstocks, for farmers to reach out to coffee shops or restaurants, and if they did have that entrepreneurial spirit to start composting or were interested in soil carbon amendment. So.
Thank you. Got it.
It is a lot, but one thing, I really appreciated the presence of sort of fresh voices or outside voices from the state, and just like your ideas and your fresh questions felt like it stirred the pot in a really compelling way. So thanks for being here.
I'm just thinking about all the future composters we're training. At 8 schools, we've got something like 1,400 people that we're training to be composters. And I want these kids to be able to find work in soil health and repairing our planet that is in dire need, or we're in dire need. The planet's doing fine. Yeah, so I you know, my mind is just thinking about like we're getting constrained with funding and all of these things, and we're getting hammered because of past generations of behavior and how we've treated our planet. And we've got to be able to find a way to value caring for our planet and being willing to pay for that. You know, we're willing to throw things in the ocean, but we're not willing to build soil under our feet. So that's just where my mind's at. So it's been a really helpful discussion. Also, I just love the idea of everyone knowing that the NRCDs and the NRCSs work with not only farmers, but landowners. I think a lot of people don't know that the conservation districts are available to work with landowners. And also AI helping with business plans is, it's in there. Just like that just sunk in my head. Thanks, James. That's where the reason I say that is because I think a lot of the small scale farmers I know stay away from NRCDs and NRCSs because they're like, I don't have a business plan. So I can't do anything without a business plan. Right. And I'm so overwhelmed by having, and I'm one of those farmers, so I'll just say that.
And even if it's then just a draft to put through, you know, to customize, right?
Yeah.
It gives you a template to start from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've talked so much about working with schools and just younger generations, and part of what I'm doing is just trying to connect volunteers to initiatives like this. And I'm working with a bunch of schools in Boston, and once I move to Vermont, I'd love to work with some schools here to just have more student volunteers, and especially like in the area of connecting small businesses to small farms to donate scraps. I feel like that's an area that that gap can be bridged by students volunteering and just being more involved in the community, and also just connecting community volunteers to initiatives like that. So yeah, this just got me thinking more about how realistic it is to do that.
Coffee grounds are black gold.
Yeah.
They are.
I'll be quick because I already took up a lot of space, but I just hear, like throughout all of this, I hear a theme of connection and resource and knowledge sharing and spending a little bit more time understanding each other's work. And as somebody from out of state, I can say like we largely look to you guys as a model, no pressure. But like when we're looking at policies for Rhode Island, like James gives us examples from here. So even if it feels like it's discouraging or it's really challenging, you guys are still leaders. But it also immediately makes me feel like we need to be more closely connected. Like I want to know more about what's happening in the state. I want us to be cross-supportive each other more collaboratively, and definitely want to keep like the conversation going to figure out how we can plug in a way that doesn't feel overwhelming or like mixing crowds in an unhelpful way, but just seeing when things overlap and stuff becomes easier because two people connected.
Nice.
I feel like we can keep it all going.
Awesome. Thank you.
Well, I too am not at this scale, but I've been trying to start a community compost at our transfer station. We have a perfect site land. The town crew dumps all the wood chips there, and I got shut down. I mean, the town's about 600 full-time residents. I got shut down because they said we would have to go through an Act 250 process. And they didn't know what they were talking about. But I'm interested in getting, like, upping my training. And I gleaned some ideas from this class just so I can go back and make a more articulate presentation. And it's not that they weren't interested in it. Someone said, oh, I talked to somebody at Waste Management District, and we would never be able to do that without all kinds of permit. Try doing it at the school.
Yeah.
So,
well, thank you for that, and feel free to reach out to me afterwards. I'm happy to
all right, I will.
move along that specific, like very specifically.
Gosh, yeah, I'm very small, well, very small scale. My bin is smaller than this table. But what I'm really gleaning and what I like to learn, not waste management, nutrient management, this is a product, it's not something we throw away. This is all good stuff that often gets diverted into the wrong place. And it is product, and we can use it, and it does make sense in so many different ways that we can not throw things away, and there is no away. So I just want to thank all of you guys for this really cool conversation, and for just tossing out some resources that I can dip into to really be able to talk about this in a way that's exciting for our program.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for your participation. I'll just say that my big takeaway is all of this. The notes might look indecipherable to you guys, but I will definitely take them home and we'll be in touch and look forward to following up. And I'm actually inspired to take on some of this work, so I get a lot of energy from these conversations to keep CAF's work going, so I really appreciate all of your time. So thank you very much.
Thank you.